far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 women growing strong. 100 women where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny. Woman, woman.
As people of African descent, we offer this land recognition in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island in the efforts and deliberate intentions toward decolonization. As people of African descent, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that sustains us, express deep gratitude to its indigenous peoples, and pledge to honor our dignity and divinity that ultimately connects us all. By Kay Johnson. Welcome to 100 ABC Fireside Chats. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold project initiated by co-authors and co-founders, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, Dr. Denise O'Neill Green, and Donna Jones Simmons. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as our website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. In addition to our fireside chats on topics that matter to our communities, such as education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, trade union, and so much more, we offer biennial book launching galas and biannual symposiums. The co-authors and co-founders would like to take this opportunity to thank each of you for attending today's fireside chat. We know that you will find these sessions educational and inspirational. So sit back, relax, and hear from our brilliant and talented honorees.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Season 5, Episode 13 of 100 ABC Women Fireside Chats. Today, we will be discussing strategies for guiding children through complex academic and social landscapes with tips from the best of educators, of sociological minds. Interesting moment in history. You know, that George Floyd moment seems to have come and gone. The world not only has moved on, it appears to have risen up. And there seems to be a vicious, deliberate attack on the minor advances that people have made regarding Black bodies in education. Now, let us think back to the summer of 2025 when everyone seemed on board, Everybody was, yes, we're eradicating anti-Black racism in education. There were Zooms, there were team meets, there were Googles ad nauseum. There were PD and all it were so many programs were designed and created to level the playing field for Black children. But what no one really took note of was the resistance. The educators who were not buying into this movement, this sudden wow reality, right? What about people who'd say, oh, I'm not racist. Oh, Black children are doing okay. What about me? I didn't commit slavery. There were educators on Zooms that would turn on the Zoom meeting, turn off their cameras, and walk away. And no one, they never, I would say, people didn't really foresee the rise of the far right and their ascension into power and this rapidly changing socio-political climate. And the fact that parents now more than ever need to advocate for systems, all systems. But today we'll be discussing the education system. So, ladies, I am looking forward to the strategies that you will share with parents on how to navigate this vast and complex education system and how to minimize the impact of anti-Black racism in education, how to empower our kids, how to ask the right questions of our educators and our elected officials, as well ensuring that each child is provided with the tools that they are legally entitled to. So it is my great honor today to welcome our first panelist, Elder Janelle Skerritt, who is a nonprofit executive and co-founder of Adinkra Farm, dedicated to building a sustainable future where people of African ancestry thrive. This amazing mother of five has held leadership roles in education and equity, parent council, co-chair of the Afrocentric School, member of the TDSB Equity Task Force, and mentor and advocate for inclusive curriculum. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. But I am so excited to welcome you, Janelle.
Thank you so much. Nice to be here today.
Great. And my first question I have for you to lead us off on this amazing and exciting discussion is, in a time when Black children are experiencing both overt and everyday racism in schools, from racial slurs to being dismissed or misunderstood, how can parents equip their children to navigate these realities without diminishing their sense of self-worth and joy?
Well, thank you for that question. I think the first place to start is something that we all need. So although this is instructive for parents dealing with children, I think we have to do it for ourselves first. So we have to start with self-knowledge and building their self-confidence, talking about who they are, the community they belong to, telling the truth about our history from the time before the invasion of those who are enslaved and so on. And so we need to reinforce some of the deep cultural philosophies, the ancient philosophies that we know exist in our community. And really, we have to strengthen their identity, not necessarily only, I'm a Pan-Africanist, so I always think about their identity first as people of African ancestry, and then their Trinidadian identity or their Jamaican identity or their Bajan or St. Vincent, St. Lucia, so forth, or Canadian, American, British, right? Because I think that's where our common sense of who we are comes. And then just two more things I would suggest. One is being honest and naming racism clearly so that children don't internalize that it's them, that it's something personal, that it's about who they are or it's about their people. And also building emotional safety for them. So looking at things like making sure that we are using affirming language. I used to when my child, I don't know, I read so many books on these things. And so when my child was sleeping, I would whisper in his ear, "You are brilliant, you are excellent, you are talented." And so I was doing this subliminal messaging as he sleeps. I don't know if it helped, but those are the kind of, guerrilla tactics I was implementing, and then really loving their culture. And a final plug for my parents, I would say that they're the ones that instilled that in me, because I didn't know what it meant to be Canadian. I always grew up knowing that I was an African person born in Trinidad, right? So I was very proud of
Wow. And you mentioned your guerrilla tactics. I tell you, I use the same guerrilla tactics too. So
that.
that's so interesting. But I listen to you and you talk about to think of your identity first and to be honest and about naming anti-Black racism. And I can think of no better person than our next panelist, Tando Hyman, who is a centrally assigned principal with the TDSB, the Toronto District School Board, and she's serving in the Center of Black Excellence for Black Student Achievement, where she leads work focused on equity, systems navigation, and improving outcomes for Black students and families. She was the inaugural principal of the Afrocentric Alternative School and has a demonstrated record of translating policy into practice across schools, systems, and communities. She works at the intersection of education, governance, and community, naming systemic patterns and working to change the blueprint for student success. So, welcome, Tando. And it's such a pleasure to have you on this show. And I just wanted to ask you, how do we affirm identity whilst ensuring the burden of navigating systemic barriers doesn't fall only on the child or family?
Well, thank you very much, Kathy. It's an honor to be in conversation with such a powerful group of women this afternoon. And I come to this conversation as an educator, a parent, and someone who works across systems. And what I'm seeing right now are that families are navigating increasingly more complex systems academically, socially, and digitally. So we want to ensure that when we're thinking about the families and how parents can support our young people, one of the things that we need to ensure is that there is foundational affirming identities. So it's not an add-on. And so when young people see themselves reflected positively through what they learn, through what they experience, and how they're engaged, building on what Elder Janelle Scarrett has said, then they come into the world with a sense of confidence, self-esteem, to the extent that they know that they are knowledge keepers, that they're not just consumers, but they're producers of a rich historical past, and they're future innovators to improve our world, to make the world a better place. And so through what they learn and what they experience, it directly impacts their confidence and their sense of belonging. And of course, that does translate into achievement. But I also want to be very clear. We cannot replace the responsibility of navigating systemic barriers solely on children and their families. That's an unfair burden, and it's not sustainable. Systems have a responsibility to examine how processes, policies, and practices and decisions are shaping outcomes. And so to actively remove those barriers where they exist is certainly what our children should have support from their parents. And I also want to ground this in a few simple but powerful strategies. The first is to intentionally do identity affirmation at home. That could be through conversation, through reading books, through cultural practices, and all of the experiences that we learn at home, right? Some do drumming, some do singing, whatever it is that helps to ground and affirm. Some do storytelling and traditional quilting and conversations about the past. So those oral stories are passed on. The second is helping to build children's voice, helping them ask questions, to express themselves, and to understand their own strengths so that when they're thrown into this um, world full of racism and systemic oppression, they know how to respond. And the third is doing this learning at an early stage. So early on engagement within school, not just when something goes wrong, but building relationships with the school system, parents, making sure that you're visible, speaking up on behalf of your children, and noticing that. And last but not least, I want to reaffirm what Elder Scarrett said. It was talking into their ear and making those affirmations. You are powerful, you are great, you are intellectual, you are amazing.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I can tell you, I've done no research on this, but anecdotally, I can tell you, you see a direct correlation between a child's self concept and their sense of self worth with their academic achievement. And it's, every time when I look, I see people, those kids that are getting the scholarships, that are thriving and succeeding in sometimes very hostile educational environments, are those kids that have a strong sense of self. And my next panelist, Anika Ford, a mother of two, an emerging scholar and a director of research and programs with the Jean Augustine Chair in Education, Community and Diaspora, is the perfect person to speak to this and continue this conversation. Her work examines decision making, life trajectories, and how definitions of success, failure, and well being are shaped by what she calls cultural reference points. She's also the CEO of Ford Consult Group and an investor building ventures and strategies that translate research into impact, opportunity, and generational wealth. So, welcome, Anika.
Thank you so much for having me today.
And thank you for agreeing to be part of this dynamic panel. So, my question to you, Anika, is you mentioned in your bio, I mentioned in your bio, your cultural reference points. Can you share a bit about this and the cultural reference points, the way they shape children and families, define success and failure? And how can parents actively reshape those definitions to better support their child's well being?
Sure. I think, well, what I call cultural reference points are ultimately the often unspoken standards we absorb, and most importantly, the baselines with which we then compare ourselves to over our life course from family, schools, peers, society, and of course, the systems that we're navigating. For example, what it means to be successful, what it means to be on track, what it means to be falling behind. These standards arguably shape how our kids interpret their abilities, their worth, and even their future possibilities. If success is narrowly defined as only academic excellence or a specific career path, our young people who diverge from this may internalize failure or even when they are thriving in other ways, devalue that. And it really takes a significant toll on their self-worth. Engaging thousands of students in my work, what we consistently hear is, well, I'm doing well in this, but I'm not good enough in this. And it has significant ramifications for how they show up and make decisions in other areas of their life. So as parents, as one significant contributor to their well-being and speaking into their ears of, and telling them possibility, we also have the power to disrupt and expand these definitions first and foremost at a very, very early age. And this starts with, I believe, making success more multidimensional, centering well being, curiosity, adaptability, and character alongside achievement, notably on terms that are self defined by our young people rather than imposed on them by us or even social media or the systems they're navigating. And it seems really hard to do, but I do strongly believe that this is something that's worth us as parents, as guardians, as caretakers, as lovers of, possibility for our young people. It's worth us striving towards. And secondly, it also means normalizing and reframing failure or things that don't go as planned as part of growth and learning and not as a final judgment, because that's also a pushback against systems that immediately make these assignments to our children. And we have to make sure that we push back against those definitions and understand that this is part of learning and not everything needs to be a final sentence, especially in our kids' younger years. Um, and thirdly, practically, I think this looks like how we respond to those setbacks, the language that we use about
Mhm.
effort, about progress, and the diversity of pathways that we expose our children to, while also naming the systems and experiences that they're being faced with ourselves as parents and not just our young kids, because sometimes we're speaking at our kids without naming, hey, we're also experiencing some of these things, and it needs to be a little bit more relational to connect with our young people. This is not, they're not going through things that we are so foreign to us that we cannot relate to, and we need to make that connection. So I believe the goal is to help our children develop that internal compass rather than relying solely on external validation, whilst also keeping in mind those systemic constraints that are not within their controls, but do play a role in their outcomes and striving.
Mhm. Wow, thank you for that. Because, I see the theme that's sort of evolving here, and it is naming, being bold in naming what's happening. And I really like when you said not everything has to be a final sentence. I think that was very powerful. And, speaking of parents, we have our next panelist who is a parent. And as in Jamaica, we would say, she likobachi talawa, meaning she's small, but she's mighty. Claudette Howell Rutherford is a wife and a mother of 3 children and a devoted community advocate. Claudette is an award winning educator and department head of social science and humanities of 22 years and is currently on secondment at the Ministry of Education. Claudette holds a master in social justice, education, and runs her own educational research and consulting firm, developing curriculum resources and offering professional development and strategic planning services from an anti oppression lens. So, welcome, Claudette.
Thank you. Thanks,
And
Kathy.
I'm so thrilled to have you here. Because as we navigate these new political realities, how can
Mhm.
parents ensure that their voice can be heard? What does authentic and effective parent and community engagement look like in the Ontario educational context?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. I also want to just say how pleased I am to be a part of this panel, and I have so much respect for everybody on here. I'm excited. Um, Yeah, so speaking about the context that we are in, it really is interesting times. There are policies now, so I'll start with the policy piece. I mean, there are policies in place now that, of course, ensure parents are better informed about the learning their children are engaged in at school, for example, policies that govern different family services offices that we know are going to be introduced in September, for example, which are intended to support families that have issues and concerns and they want to bring them to their respective schools or school boards. And so those are in place currently. What I want to talk about today is the access and how different families may experience those entry points, right? Because not everybody is being heard in the same way. And I think that the access to information isn't being, shared equitably. And that's the issue. The policy is in place, but it impacts our families differently based on how they're being perceived by the system. The current structure, and this is you'll have to forgive me. I'm gonna sort of go off into a dreamscape because this current culture of education is based on this idea that education and learning and schooling is owned and operated by an institution, right? And that these children are coming to these spaces as empty vessels, and the school is sharing is first of all deciding what knowledge and information is considered valuable, and then deciding how that's going to be assessed. When actually parents are and community are vital parts of this schooling and education and learning, right? And I think right now the system is set up in a way where the institution holds all the cards. Our communities, our parents are very rich in knowledge, and they're sending their children to school with that information. So I think we kind of have to remember that the community, um, in actuality, the children belong to the community. They return to that community when they leave school. Um, and the intention of learning is so that those children will come back to their community and feed and advance that community. So it is in a sense, we have these policies in place now that are intended to help our families, but our access points are not equitable.
Mhm.
There's, I think, a lack of respect for Black community and community eldership, which I think that needs to shift. Like we have Elder Janelle here; she's very much involved, and we have a host of elders that are ready, right, to build into and to feed into this education system that are being ignored, right? So I think it's understanding the necessity of having eldership at the table, of respecting community voice, and the co-creation of our learning, and our system of learning, with parents involved um, in the co-development of what that should look like. That's not happening now. And I want to end by saying that you had touched on this earlier. There's maybe 50 odd years of research that shows us that um, one of the primary important pieces of having children be very successful in school is having their parents and community involved in that system, right? Um, and so it's unfortunate that we have a system that doesn't understand that or preserve that. We have research compendiums, international and local here, that tell us that high parental and community engagement is correlated with increased student attendance, increased math scores, increased literacy, increased sense of confidence in academic students having their own confidence in academic ability, and improved sense of belonging in school. So there's a mutuality and a reciprocal benefit, both for families and in education, to have this correlation, this sort of coming together of family, community, and schools. And I'd love for that to be sort of brought forward in a major way. I'm hoping that policies that are coming forward would help to bolster that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you mentioned parent involvement. I can tell you, my mother, God bless her soul, 27 years ago when she was doing her doctoral research, long before it was, I guess, in vogue now, you know, um, the whole thesis was about, and this was done in Jamaica, about the importance of parental engagement. And when you looked at every factor, parent engagement still topped finances, you name it, anything, parent engagement was the key. And it's important. You talk about community, you talk about eldership, right? These are really, really important parts of the puzzle. And I'm going to ask a question, and I would invite any of my panelists to weigh in on it, because um, you know, they almost a little over a year ago, the Ontario Human Rights Commission authored a document, and it was called Dreams Delayed. And this document, it's a report. It identifies systemic anti-Black racism. And this is not the first document that has done it. One of the documents I always like to refer to is the Stephen Lewis report. It's over 30 years old, right? And I think it's shocking that that report, it could have been written and produced today. It's the findings is still relevant, right? Our kids are still being subjected to serious anti-Black racism in education. And it's deeply embedded in policies and practices. So, how should Black parents approach advocacy within school systems that may not always acknowledge or respond adequately to the harm that Black children face in getting education? So, Elder Janelle, would you like to start with that? And I invite everyone to please jump in because I like to hear
Well,
the different
I would love
perspectives.
to start with that. And one of the things I think I'll say first is that as we get into advocacy, I've met over the years many people that sort of jump in when it's personal or when it relates to them. And so one of the things I think is important is that we don't just look at the latest report, but we do look and try to understand that. And beyond the reports, talk to some of the longer term advocates, because what tends to happen is as we cycle in, as new people coming to talk about the system, there's a lot of goodwill, and the people who are working in the system are better educated about what has been said before. And so the treating of the information in dreams delayed should not be that this is new. It should be that this, like you put it, this is still going on. And I'll tell you a quick story that highlighted this for me. We were fighting for a long time for race-based data because it was missing. There was nothing, presented and so on. But when parents and other advocates they're like, oh, well, we don't trust the system to collect the data about race. Well, why are they collecting that data and so on? So it was sort of counter to what we had been asking for and advocated for many years. And both were voices coming for the community. So I would say that advocacy has to begin with self-education around previous advocacy. And then I would not put it only on the parents to do that, but to the people who have been advocating, we need to do a better job of informing the community of, okay, so we had this conversation and this is what is going on, because then we start to lose ground. And so using findings from previous reports and really understanding, okay, what is dreams delayed saying that the Stephen Lewis report also said, and then there was a report in Montreal, and then there's reports in Nova Scotia. So we also need to widen the scope of our knowledge and our advocacy, because we might learn a lot from solutions that were done in other places. And finally, because I could go on, I would say is that the most important thing is realizing that we need to do it together with other parents. And it's not just like we're personalizing it, because it is very personal when our child suffers an injustice in the school system or in any system. But really rely on the other advocates in our community and come together. That would be my key message today.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Would anybody else like to weigh in? And I would, okay.
Oh, go ahead, Tando.
Yeah.
Certainly. I would like to weigh in, and I do apologize for having my camera off. This is where we give grace. I am joining you from a hospital hallway following surgery that my mom just got out of an hour ago, and I've been rerouted and moved. But funnily enough, she being that quintessential community advocate thought that it would be appropriate that I still join today to talk about how important it is that we center Black students, Black families, and our community as it relates to how parents can continue to advocate, being a parent advocate of herself. And one such organization was called the Ontario Parents of Black Children before this new iteration of which she was a member. And so when we think about the Ontario Human Rights Dreams Delayed report, it cites Langston Hughes' poems. What happens to a dream deferred? right? Does it dry up? Does it fester, or does it explode? And so when we think about the data that has been unearthed on and unleashed on our community for over 15 years, whether it's the Stephen Lewis report, in which it identified and coined the use of, or first publicly mentioned the term anti-Black racism in our vernacular. The data showed that students were disproportionately streamed into applied courses. They were overrepresented in suspensions, expulsions. They've had lowered expectations. And so sometimes our families were not able to speak up on behalf of their own families. And so what does that mean for us? It means that this Dreams Delayed report, being that culmination of over 50 to 70 years of activism and data, is saying the work is still not done. It's saying we need to move to action because the Black community has been over-researched and we're not seeing complementary monitoring tools systemically across our school systems and across the province. And so what we need to continue to do is to ensure that we give those systems navigation tools to our parents and our communities so that they can speak up on behalf of our children, whether they're in our homes, or our children, whether in our communities.
Thank you for that. And first of all, I just want to thank you that, and it's a testament to your family. And you talk about elders. I know your mom, and your mom is truly, again, an elder that have been doing the work long before it was in vogue and in fashion, right? And, we owe a lot to your mom, to your family, for making and hanging in there and advocating for change for Black children in education. And, I just say, just the fact that you are here is a testament to your deep commitment to this work. And I thank you for that, and I honor you for that. And as you rightly said, I always say, there has been no other species, not even insects, not even, different germs or amoebas, anything that has been studied more than Black people. I think we are as I say, over-researched. I think we're othered. We are the what about me for everything. And somehow the urgency of what is happening to our precious babies often gets overlooked. And when you look at the Dreams Delayed report, and you look, and this is not like the Stephen Lewis report is just one, as I say, of hundreds of reports that is well documented, that's undisputed. You look, and again, if you look at the Dreams Delayed report, they have compiled a historical compendium of recommendations, and all the published papers that, not all, but a comprehensive list of published papers regarding anti-Black racism in education. The action plan has also, they have kind of four main areas. They talk about the accountability and transparency that's needed, and they have actions for that. There are about 14 of them. You have the monitoring and evaluation, right? There is another over a dozen of those. Student well-being, they talk about the actions that are needed for that. And they list, and they have duty holders. And it's a very clear and prescribed document. And I think that it's really important for our parents to understand, and as is mentioned before, that parents and the community, they do have power. And I'd be interested to see, Anika, if you want to weigh in on how or what suggestions you may have with regards to how parents respond to such this amazing report. And before you say that, I would say, as a co-founder and inaugural chair of the Black Trustee Caucus for the Ontario Public School Board Association, we made a submission too. And a lot of our suggestions we see embedded in this report. And it just goes to show that we know what needs to be done, right? So how can we help our parents to ensure that, this does not become just another report that is shelved. And we're going to be here 30 years later discussing, oh, the Dreams delayed report was out 30 years ago.
Right.
I think it's a big question. So, I mean, rightfully so, and what everyone has already mentioned is that this is a continuing fight. And
Yes.
so to think that that the publication of this report is the end and that everything that we ask out of the report will immediately be actioned on, I feel like that's definitely very optimistic. And that might be the elephant in the room, right? Is that we consistently we know and they know that this is the reality. And so we're talking about delayed dreams, but also as mothers, we're fiercely protecting those dreams, right?
Mhm.
And a whole other report could be published on the weight of protecting our
Yes.
children's dreams and how we navigate that. And so I think about just even in the everyday, as parents, the fight of protecting our children's dreams and what that looks like. But then coming together as a collective, as Elder Janelle said, is, it's relational. Where as parents, we're protecting our kids' dreams and pushing back and advocating. But then as a collective, we need to rally behind the reasons for why we're doing so and how this has a historical context. This report didn't just happen today. It's not going to be the only one, and there's going to be I think this is going to be a continuous fight. And so I think about the ways in which us as Black parents even need to be speaking about this with other parents. This is not just a Black parent issue. And often we talk about it as Black parents because we can relate to what's not said because we know it in our bodies, in every single part of us, we know what's happening. But this is not just a Black issue. This is an issue of our humanity. This is an issue of what happens when young people stop dreaming about what's possible for them. Why doesn't that seem to have larger implications for the economy at scale? We're talking about large numbers of people, young people, who will not realize their full potential because where they're navigating a system that is designed very much to constrain it, restrict it, and often limit it intentionally or unintentionally. And so I think what we as parents need to do, as Black parents specifically, is raise this beyond just a Black parent conversation and ensure that it's recognized as this is much larger. This is even an economic viability situation for Canada. What
Yeah.
happens when hundreds and thousands of our young people have lost hope in their aspirations and ability to achieve those things? It's not just delayed dreaming. It's also, are these dreams even being realized, period, full stop?
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so I would encourage our parents, all of us, to be involved in those conversations beyond just Black parents.
Mhm. So, Anika, in your research on youth decision making and life trajectories,
Mhm.
what would you say are the most critical ways parents can support their children in navigating education and early career choices in an uncertain and rapidly changing world?
So a few things. I think one of the most important insights, a little bit of background and context. One of the
Mhm.
most important insights from not just my work, but work that has been being done for a long time, Black feminist scholars, others in the Canadian and even in the American, like where there are Black bodies present, decision making is deeply relational. Sometimes we always put it down to the one person, oh, they've made this wrong decision. Why did they do this? Decisions
Mhm.
don't happen in isolation. Choices don't exist in isolation. And so our young people are drawing on the information, networks, and signals available to them. Depending on what's available to them, their decisions and choices change. So this means that access to people, exposure, guidance often matters just as much as ability. And these decisions are even just as important to how we define, measure, and appraise what we say is well, healthy, and okay. I think this is particularly important because sometimes this means we don't name what's happening to us or our young people until we are in a crisis state. because our reference points are similar. All of us might be experiencing maybe a similar hardship. And so when that happens, we're navigating and we're not saying, well, something's off, something's wrong. Everyone's talking about the same experience, so we think that this is normal. But this is not the case, and it doesn't mean that it's healthy for us or helpful. So I don't know. I'm trying to think of how to answer it more succinctly. With that being said, I believe we as parents, I guess, we can support our children in three key ways. I think expanding exposure, helping them to see a wide range of emotion, naming, careers, pathways, and possibilities beyond what is immediately visible or even what we're used to. And this includes supports for mental health within our communities to the future of work, because as we know, it's expanding and it's changing at a velocity that we as parents may not be as plugged into as they are. And we need to be aware of this and listen, because that relationship between, our futures, our young people's futures and their mental health are directly correlated. Secondly, I think by building relationships, connecting them to mentors, sponsors, conversations, and environments where they can learn and ask questions that are current and relevant to their realities and aspirations are helpful. And we hear this all the time from students and young people. And third, by shifting from directing decisions, like telling our kids this is what it is and this is how to do it, to supporting their navigation. So this can look like something as simple as moving from asking, what do you want to be, to what kind of life do you want to experience? What are you curious about? And also question our own limitations as parents in our understanding of what's next and what they're capable of, because we're also thinking about things from our own limitations and our own experiences. So I think those three things are really helpful, and we hear it from young people all the time. And sometimes what we hear from them is like, well, my mom doesn't understand. They don't understand. They don't understand. Because often as parents, we're saying, you got to make this decision. And we're saying it because we want to protect them. We want to ensure that there's stability in their future, but we often lose sight of the fact that the world that they're navigating is not necessarily exactly how we understand it. And so the goal is not to have a fixed plan, but I think to equip our young people with the skills, confidence, relationships, and adaptability to move through uncertainty with intention, critical thinking, and at the utmost, self-love and compassion.
Absolutely. So, Claudette, let me ask you this then. What barriers might Black students and parents be facing within the current educational system, and how can they successfully navigate those challenges?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think Tando had started telling us, giving us a little bit of the lay of the land earlier. Um, Black children are being mistreated, as we started out by saying, mislabeled, pushed out, and expelled from the system. And we know statistically, the data is telling us and has been telling us for a long time that Black students are overrepresented in school discipline data, so suspended at a higher rate, expelled at a higher rate. Um, they're graduating at a lower rate. They're overrepresented in school expulsions and transfers. Something that, to be honest, years ago, I wasn't thinking about school transfers as an issue, but it's on my radar now. It's on my radar now, right? Of moving from school to school, because that's another sort of data point that I think we need to be aware of. So also represented in receiving non-gifted special education supports, lower enrollment in specialized programs, scoring lower on standardized tests. And sorry, I want to make sure I hit on these points because I want to make sure we don't forget, right? And what is education about at all in the first place? When we look at how other students are experiencing our education system, the disparity is vast. It is vast because there are students that are moving through the system really quite seamlessly, and just recently just being involved in some sort of like cohort analyses. I'm looking through at, what is the experience of this particular, now that we have the data, right? What is the experience of these students versus this? And so the disparities are vast. In addition to that, just, our histories are also being excluded and extracted from curriculum. And so students are not only facing that disparity, just as they're experiencing schools, their day-to-day exposure to what is important in terms of education and knowledge and their pathways, et cetera, are also being impacted. And many Black parents, I mean, maybe us here, um, went through the same education system, facing the same things themselves that they are now trying to prevent for their own children. And so, how do we navigate that? How do we move around that? Um, I will start by saying that knowledge of how this system works and understanding those, entry points and access points. So what conversations am I going to have and with whom? Who's, responsible for curriculum development? Who's responsible for, the expulsion hearings or the policies that, for appeal, for example, who's getting this information about appeals to suspensions? So it's just sort of understanding the who's and what's, I think, is really critical. And I do want to pay. Yes, I'll say that in a second. There are entry points, like formal entry points into education system to help parents to advocate and to provide feedback and input. We know about parent council. We know there are regional leads, right, for different councils and committees. There are the standing committees, the regional committees, like parent involvement committee or special education. So we know that those things are there. We also, well, for now, are voting for trustees, right? Our parents are the voice of education system. So those trustees are the persons who, you know this very well, are voting in the leaders of the school board, right? And those school board trustees are hiring directors. So I mean, parents to understand where they fall within the structure, I think is important. And attendance at those standing committee meetings, right? We often there's many policies they're being read through and discussed, reports from the school board, and if you're not at the table and you're not hearing or reading those reports, many of us, I'll be honest, me too, sometimes too busy to read through, those documents, but those are entry points, right? So I'll start by saying that those are established, they're in place, and we always have access to that. But I think also we know that for decades, like I read way back, Natasha Henry, she produced this document talking about Black parents who were withholding taxes in late 1800s because
Yes.
they knew that their children were not being treated fairly in the education system. So we as Black people have a tradition and our histories are tied directly, like we have been doing this for for more than a few decades. We are grounded and our resistance is in our blood. So we have been doing this work. I wanted to speak about the ACHAs and the CABE and the original Tando Organization of Black Children. It is in my notes because I wanted to say Karen Braithwaite. Like those are people I looked up to, and my mother as well. And so building that tradition of we have to speak up and say what we know to be true. It's interesting that the data that was eventually collected, I mean, it was nice to see it on paper, but we knew what those stories
Yeah.
were before they documented it and put numbers beside it, right? Because we were living it. So I would say, in terms of navigation, it is to know the system, it is to collectivize, as been said by my panel colleagues here, and to build that collection of advocates, right? Don't go alone. There are still organizations now. There's Uplift Black. We have Parents of Black Children Canada. We have PARSC. I mean, there's and all the way to Windsor to know it, like right across.
Yes.
There are organizations that, are doing a job well done, I think, of advocating and supporting parents, of moving through these really difficult, like, and I don't want to come across as, pessimistic, but I want to say that um, those dreams have been delayed. The reports, the 50 and 60 years of reports in the Compendium for Dreams Delayed has articulated and documented our stories. And so we will need to, um, to advocate and to speak up. And lastly, I will have to put a plug in for my Saturday school upbringing. I think I want to say, Aljanelle, that is where I met you first. And I think I was like 12. I don't know how old I was, but that Saturday school experience for me, and that was something that was started, I believe, I want to say Acha, but correct me if I'm wrong. It would have been in the 70s.
Yeah.
Um, correct me if I'm wrong, please.
ACHA has one of the longest standing
Large.
programs. So that's the African Canadian Heritage Association. And
Yes.
both Tando and I have history with that organization, both as students, but also as tutors. And then for years, I was tutoring with the Tropicana Community Services Saturday program.
Right.
And
I went to
there are Saturdays,
Tropicana as
there's
well.
higher, I think it was higher learning.
There's higher
There's
learning.
so
Yeah.
many mhm,
And that was the
schools
culture.
and
That's how I grew up in
opportunities.
that culture. So I knew the truth
Yes.
about who I was. I know who I was. I
Hmm.
knew what my ancestors had accomplished, and I knew what I was capable of. And I knew my Monday to Friday, and my family treated it that way. My Monday to Friday education was a supplement, right? So I
Right.
knew what that story was, and then I knew what the actual story was. And I think that is a gift that my family gave me that I give my kids, and I would encourage every Black family to do. Like we know how the system works, and we go through it. And I'm an agent of the system. I've taught for many years, right? But I think it's important to infuse, to ground our children in exactly who we are, know what their capabilities are, and to move through the system in a way where we know we have to get this paper, but the knowledge, what we get out of it, we have to build that for ourselves. We are stronger
Amen.
together, right? And
As they
so,
say, Ashe.
Ashay.
Ashe, yeah, we build
May
it
I chime in?
ourselves.
May I
Oh,
chime in
absolutely.
Please
to
do.
say
I'm
that
done. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm really happy you brought in the history as well, and the fact that we've always had to do this. So, when the drum was taken away, we reinvented ways of getting the rhythm and connecting with our culture. When we were not allowed to read, we still learned and taught others and so forth. And, going back even further, we created systems of writing and recording, and our oral history has always been important. So we know how to get around it. And one of the things that I've been listening intently and loving what I'm hearing other panelists talk about. And I wanted to just comment on the whole elder question, because I'm now embarking on trying to teach and understand and learn myself about stepping into eldership in an authentic way. And that it's not just about becoming older, it is about the body of work and the service and the knowledge and making those connections. That's one thing. And the other thing I wanted to do was a plug for parents of Black children, because I was around for Ontario parents of Black children as well, and all of the other parent groups that got together and started these Saturdays programs that you're talking about, Claudette, and so forth. But what I think the parents of Black children is doing very successfully is that I am noting that Black educators, Black parents are treating them as a resource, as a place to go and so that's a very important, it's almost that we're establishing, and I think it's aided, we're establishing them as an institution that our community can rely on. And I think that is partly due to the advent of Instagram, and TikTok, and the ability and blogs and podcasts. And so I think that will make the connection that I think has been missing for those who don't have time to sit and read, the next 45 to 150-page report, of how the situation has marginally changed for our people. So that, with that said, I'll, I'm complete.
Yeah. No, and actually we're going to touch on technology a bit later, but I just wanted to circle back because it was so nostalgic hearing, the history of,
Yeah.
the resistance, right? And, James Delay is just the newest iteration of what we have been advocating for decades, right? And untold, elders and people whose shoulders we are standing on, right, as we do
Sure.
this work. And like just listening to speak, Claudette is like, man, isn't she little but Talawa? Because you mentioned if you're not at the table, right? I always say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? And it's important to remember that. You mentioned trustees, you had so many nuggets. As a former trustee, I can tell you, I have heard and personal, I can tell you even, I think it was you, Elder Jeanette, when you mentioned about a lot of people getting into the work for personal reasons. I ran as a trustee because of the violence that was heaped on my children, right? And I can tell you, as a trustee, you have heard come, and as a parent, you'd have our kids telling, and this is not happening in the 1920s. They're telling our babies, you're dumb because you're Black. Your kind doesn't go to university, right? They never knew Black kids were smart, right? And where are they getting this information, right? I can tell you personally, I have a child who got perfect in a Gauss math exam, and over 30,000 people wrote this exam, right? And only 150 kids got perfect on it. But the results were sent to the school, and an educator didn't just said, "Oh, we don't have to tell them." And when they were questioned, they didn't think we would care, right? And people don't understand what is truly happening to our kids. And the ones that do, I think there are people that are turning a blind eye, and it is left to parents to really advocate for our children. And I can tell you, I can only imagine the layers that is and the impact, right? When you have a child that's neurodiverse. So I'm going to ask Thando if you could please help parents to understand how parents can speak up for their neurodiverse children when a school system doesn't always get their needs or experiences. And how can educators better support Black children who are neurodiverse, especially when it comes to both schoolwork and fitting in socially?
Thank
So,
you. Thank you
yeah.
so very much for that question, Kathy, because first of all, our children are great, unique, talented young people. And so often, I remember reading Malcolm Gladwell's book called The Outliers, and how he really framed, what do we bring to the surface, and what are all of our unique talents and gifts that sometimes schooling does not necessarily bring out, because schools are essentially about conformity, where education is about transforming who you are and critically thinking. And so when we think about special education and neurodivergent students, we also, and to Ms. Rutherford's point, Claudette's point, it's to really talk a little bit about how we can access some of the systems and supports that are available to be able to do just that, systems navigation. So when we're thinking about our young people, what are their interests? What are their unique talents and abilities? And how might we as parents advocate on behalf of children to say, this is how you need to see my child? Beyond the individual education plan, which is an IEP, parents can certainly address special education from a research standpoint in asking for accommodations and ways in which students can be included in the classroom. Things such as, how they choose to prompt, scribe, research, complete homework assignments, whether it is, and school-based assignments, whether it is paper and pencil tasks, whether it's technology. All of those particular tools are accessible for our students, if, of course, parents know about that. Then the other piece is around navigating the school support team meetings, speaking to specialists, whether they be school psychologists, school social workers, etc. I mean, I can delve a little bit more deeply into that part of systems navigation. And then thinking about all of the evidence-based research that have come from Black educators who have researched about neurodivergent children and Black students in particular around strategies by which they learn. I'm thinking about even special education in Black boys, Jawanja Kunjufu. I'm thinking about Dr. Al Tatum's work around how to teach Black boys in particular. And so there's also an opportunity for parents to create systems of accountability. You mentioned before, and I'll go back a little bit around the Dreams Delayed report because you talked about the duty holders. And those duty holders are anyone from the faculties of education to the education school boards to educators themselves to associations, professional associations. And the question really is about how do we ask for the supports that needed to be given to our young people and monitor that. And I've been thinking about that because if we're wanting for things to change and we have duty holders who have action plans, then perhaps we should be asking how these action plans will be monitored and addressed for a report back. How does special education, in terms of how Black students have been overrepresented in special education around academic achievement, but underrepresented in special education around gifted and specialized programs, how does that fall into being? So parents can see a direct trajectory around ways in which they can support their children. So I just want to kind of take it back to some of the systemic pieces as well as the historical pieces. And I really want to affirm our speakers earlier, Claudette and Elder Janelle, who talked about how important the work of community has helped to really inform our work today, to the extent that we have to acknowledge that if it weren't for the advocacy of community, we wouldn't have established the particular systems and structures, policies and practices that we are implementing today. So neurodivergent students and children can access supports directly through their schools, can access supports directly through their own special education resources in community. And sometimes that's thinking about going into our community and working with Black communities support systems in which they can offer a little bit more than perhaps what is easily accessible through the mainstream.
So thank you for sharing that, Janelle, because I was going to ask you, as a parent of a neurodivergent child, to comment on your experience, because in my experience, we know that, very often Black children that are neurodivergent are seen with a deficit lens, right? Whereas they don't even necessarily are always provided with the supports as other neurodivergent kids, right? And I think it's important. So if you could expand on your experience as a parent of a neurodivergent kid.
Yeah, so I think for me, the experience has been both positive and negative. We are aware, but you have to be very highly educated as a parent advocating, because those things are not necessarily offered openly to the Black child. That's been the experience. So there are structures in place within education to support a child that is neurodiverse, and yet there's, I would say, a layer of racism in how the information around those things are applied and how you get access both to the gifted program and to programs that support the child. That's been the experience of it. So I think parents need to be made aware and do the research to find out, talk to other parents and so on to find out, because sometimes there are programs that even though my husband and I both are very, very involved, we missed things because it just wasn't openly shared. But what I would say too is that another thing that we can do is do some advocacy. And what we were successful in doing with our child was building a community around that person and around him as a person, I should say, and to really, help him to have people that he could rely on that understood who he was and not othering him, because I think we have some stigma in our community as well to break down, so that it's not, so that when we're interacting with uh, these children, that we're not thinking of it. I mean, I've heard so many negative things which I won't repeat, but just to say that we need to do some work in our community around having our community be a safe place for children who are neurodiverse as well. We've had to do that, and to establish trust and to show them they can trust. I'll tell just one quick story. He went coat shopping at the mall. And I know this is not within education, but I'm talking about the fact that it's all around. And he loves to spend money. It feels good to him, right? So they were having a 2-for-1 sale, and he bought 4 coats. And I was explaining to him, you don't need 4 coats. And so we're going to go back and we're going to have a conversation. And the people at the store said, oh no, we have a strict no return policy once you've made a purchase. And so, we had to help him to navigate and advocate and make a threat to the store and so on. And teach him that sometimes when people are trying to help you, they're a salesperson, because he thought, no, he was giving me really good information on why I need those 4 coats. Right. So really being there to stand in the gap, to advocate. That example has to do with retail, but we have to do that in education as well, because they're not necessarily going to get the same fair deal. And I think, yeah, so those are the points I wanted to make. There was a role that we had to play in educating the community around us as well to accept his humanity. Right?
And
And
if I
thank you
may,
for that. Because, okay, sure, Tando, because I have a question for you that I will ask you after.
certainly, and if I may just add to that, I recall having worked with neurodivergent students, and one of the things that often happens is schools do not feel that they can teach to their strengths and abilities. It's as if they must fit in and conform to what is already prescribed. And one of the things, having worked with parents, it was, wait, what we have to do as educators is to find out what that student is really good at. And we have to keep at it until, and what they're interested in, so we can unearth, unpack those gifts, those talents. And I recall one of those young men being Elder Janelle's son. And I recall how people thought, you're not going to get it, Tando. You're not going to get it. And every day we went back to the drawing board. We said, okay, this strategy might not work. Let's try a different strategy. And we kept on trying strategies until, it was that eureka, aha moment. And what we learned in that trajectory is we don't need to build schools for children to conform to. What we need to do is unearth their talents so that they can grow and develop and achieve success. And success looks differently for each and every student.
Ashe, I tell you, the wisdom is just, wow, warming my heart, and you're absolutely right. And I can tell you, as you're speaking there, I was thinking of ACCN has a robotics team called Umoja, Team 7712. And they actually are doing amazing work with robotics with neurodivergent students. And the transformation is unbelievable, and the impact they are having. And it just goes to show you can find the magic is in educators finding and unlocking and unleashing the potential of each and every kid, And Thando, I wanted to ask you about technology, because with technology and social media now embedded in our children's lives, how can parents move beyond monitoring towards coaching so that young people are not just consuming technology, but using it for innovation, creativity, and solving real world problems?
Well, technology and social media is here to stay. So the voices like Dr. Chris Alexander reminds us that young people are not just consumers of technology, they're also potential innovators. And I think that that framing is very important because it shifts how we show up as parents. And if I may, when I think about all of the Black inventors that we celebrate today, whether it be, the GPS, for example. All of these technologies were built out of necessity. And who better than Black folk who've experienced trauma, who've experienced hardship, having to recreate a different Afrofuturist world than to think about our young people as potential innovators. So, why that framing is important is because we need to use the technology not just as consumers, but for how we can advance the world. So, with that said, however, technology is also a tool that requires intentional monitoring and parental controls. And while we're giving children access to phones and platforms, we have a responsibility to understand what they're engaging with, to also set boundaries, and to have ongoing conversations about digital safety, identity, decision making. There's a lot that's coming at them at such a rapid rate that we also need to help them navigate that. So I often say to parents, if we're not guiding it, then the algorithm will guide it. And so the algorithm is not designed with our children's well being in mind. So we can't be passive in this space. But I also encourage parents not to just say that it's solely in a place of restriction. The real opportunity is in shifting towards coaching. And that coaching looks differently and shows up in different spaces. So it means that young people think about how they can use technology to build skills, whether that's coding, content creation, storytelling, design, or even exploring solutions to real world problems like sustainability or community challenges. And I pause here to shout out Black Esteem and the STEM girls work that's happening with young Black girls using technology to solve real world problems. And so, one practical strategy is to co use it. So, be in space with your child when they're using the technology, even occasionally, so that they know that there is some supervision there. So, watching what they watch, asking questions, understanding the digital world, because when we understand it, we can guide it more effectively. I also think that we have to be mindful of equity, of access and exposure. I I might have another divergent conversation in which we're talking about AI a lot. And oftentimes they say that those who've coded AI do not look like us and they do not speak from our vantage point. So we have to be very, very critical when we use those tools to make sure that we're not just consuming it, but we're guiding and directing what we want to see and use of AI in AI. And so not all children are being introduced to the same kinds of digital opportunities. So part of our role, both as parents and educators, is to expand what's possible for them in this space. So monitoring matters, boundaries matter, but equally important is helping children move through the world, just not just consuming technology, but creating it. And I was so pleased to see, young people creating apps, for example, thinking about patents, creating podcasts, and then using that technological understanding to inform entrepreneurship. There's so much richness, but it's how we use the tools that will be the successful piece in the end.
Absolutely. And, thank you for that. And you mentioned Black Esteem, and there are so many amazing organizations doing amazing work. You also have the organization for economic the Organization for Economic Development and Diplomacy, right? And again, just leaders in harvesting and harnessing the potential of Black students. And I think, it comes to when you talk about, the situation around these amazing organizations, we look at funding for them. And again, there's a role for parents to again make sure your voice is heard in advocating for sustainable funding for these organizations, right? And find like organizations that are doing real meaningful work and have positive impact on students. And Anika, I want to ask you a question as a parent and as a researcher, right? If in you look at in your work, right? What lessons have you learned about sustaining hope and driving change across generations? Because, I don't want to leave this discussion like it's doom and gloom and, there's no hope, because there's lots of amazing strategies that have been shared. So I want to ask all four of you panelists this question, but I'm going to start with you, Anika, about driving change across generations, especially when progress can be very slow, it can be frustrating, it can be inconsistent, to say the least. So, Anika?
I'm going to draw on a few things that were shared by all of the ladies on the panel. I would start by saying plugging into the broader ecosystems of support for Black students in our communities, because the whisperings that Elder Janelle had already shared, that is that I think that that's been passed down like generation to generation, and sometimes we think like, oh, we're just doing this thing, but it's not trivial by any means. And when we start talking about it, we realize that it's part and parcel of our community. So I think to just sum it up, it's plug into broader ecosystems of support for Black students, which support and facilitate a critical awareness of our Blackness in spaces alongside possibility. And we know that that works because we know, like, Center of Black Excellence, all of these spaces are spaces that are supporting and enabling parents and young people to navigate and affirm who they are and their possibility. And I would say, secondly, I think it's important, you said not to doom and gloom. I think it's important to, not just paint the picture of despair, but rather use it as a form of it's knowledge, right? We're arming our young people with the ability to name, locate, and place their experiences in the broader system. So it's not to say, woe is me. It's more of, this is what's happening. How do I navigate this more effectively? What resources and tools are available to me to access once I'm able to name what's happening? So, it's that, but also at the same time recognizing that not everything is our young people's fault, because a lot of when you hear things from students, they feel so down on themselves as if this is something that they brought on themselves. And we really need to equip our young people with recognizing the distinction between being accountable for self and naming a system that is constraining or placing a barrier. There's a distinction, and we need to really equip our young people with that, because otherwise they take that on as a personal failing, and then it impacts every other decision that they're making. And so I think that that's really important for us to do, because what we're seeing from students and learning from students consistently is, well, I'm not going to go to university because so and so said. I'm not going to make this decision because of this, this, and this. And none of those reasons are actually a failing internally or because they didn't want to be there. And so I think we really need to be able to equip our young people with making that distinction and calling out what's a systemic constraint versus an individual limitation, which is so critical.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Anika. Claudette?
That's so good, Anika. That is yeah, thank you for that. Uh I think we've said it in different ways. The thing I'm thinking about, but what I think has been a critical shift is Black families, so students, parents, teachers, community agencies, academic research tables, working collectively, right? Because, I think the system would like for all these voices to be siloed and speak separately and potentially have separate goals. But I think, we know what we all want, right? And that is for our children to have the lives that they deserve, right? The lives that we were dreaming about before they even came into being. And so I think it's that we know that we have the same goal, but it is to have a collective voice and a collective community strategy. So I know it's something that is being worked on in different and being led by different spaces, but I think that for me, when we actualize on that collective strategy, and it's going to be multi-sector, right? Because it's not just education, but today our conversation is on education. So to have a strategy that we've created, right, amongst ourselves collectively, and how we would like to be engaged and how we would like to move through this system that exists, because it exists and it's, and I speak as an agent, I've been in the education system as a teacher. If all the things I knew about how our children were being treated in that system, I learned in the first 5 years. And I could have left, but I stayed because of it, right? And I think that, and it's not about me. I'm just saying that, we know what we're up against, but it's for us to create a strategy ourselves, and apply that strategy to the system. That's my envisioning. Because, and we talked a little bit about parents of Black children, what that lever is that they've been able to pull is the system navigation, right? It is to take all of the knowledge that is in that system and to share it with all the people that didn't have it before, right? Through whichever means. You mentioned social media, but they've created navigation guides, they've created tools, resources, as you said, Elder Janelle, that are now, that information isn't hidden anymore, right? So the shift of power, right, which is what creates, um, the disparities for our kids, is the shift in power. And I also want to infuse some hope in the sense that, I also remember coming into education and my first or second year going to symposium talking about demographic data collection, which we now have, just started. Black grad coaches, which we didn't have before, integral parts of our system now, right? We have frameworks like the OHRC Dreams Delayed report, which, during my time, I will say in education, I've only seen maybe three or four. I'm remembering towards race equity. Anika, I have to plug Carl James there, and some other work around push out that Nana Day had worked on. So in my career in education, there has been advances in, the landscape in terms of developments of frameworks that have been community centered. So I would say that's great. And then the focus revisions that I can't not speak about it, the focus revisions for Black history, for grade 7, 8, and 10, massive project that has been very much built with community voice. And that was really hard to do, but community did feed into the actual writing of that curriculum. And I will say, maybe apart from Dr. Fulkuba's work, that hasn't been done in my time in education. So I'm leaving you with those nuggets, right? Tidbits of hope that we are moving things forward. We have been doing that. So I just want to say this is our leg of the race, right? Our parents did a bit and then we continue. So I know it will not be solved and changed. And my goal, I think I've done well so far, is my three children will carry this forward. They have been given the gifts already that they are going to do the work that their forefathers were doing. And that is not a burden. It feels sometimes very heavy, but the work is not a burden. The work is the
That's
work.
right.
The
It's
work is our human,
absolutely,
right? It's centering our humanity and it's bringing us forward. And it's the reason we're still here. You mentioned
yeah.
all these, we're overstudied, but we're also I think, a species that for all that we have endured shouldn't even be here, but
Yeah,
we are, right? Like
absolutely.
that we have endured and we're still here.
Yeah,
Like, okay, so it's just legs of the race. So I leave
yeah,
that with our listeners, and yeah, it is not our burden.
yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. And Tando, if you can give us a 2 minute, well, a 1 minute nugget, and I'm going to ask Elder Janelle to give us the last word of hope and encouragement. So, Tando.
Wonderful. The Center of Excellence is also another nugget of hope. We'll be celebrating 5 years this upcoming June, which was born out of at least 50 years of community advocacy. Our mandate is to notice, name, and interrupt anti-Black racism through that systems navigation. So I'll close with this, that children are grounded in community, and when they are grounded in community and affirmed in who they are, they develop the confidence and clarity to navigate any space. And when that's paired with informed families and systems that are responsive and accountable, we begin to see real change, not just for individual students, but across the system. So, because this work is not just about us helping children navigate the world as it is, it's also about us ensuring that the systems that they enter are worthy of them. And that's how we begin to change the blueprint for what's possible. There's tons of possibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Elder Janelle.
Oh, I just will quickly say, well, thank you to all those wonderful words of wisdom, that I would take it back to really understanding that we are building on the work that our ancestors started, and that we belong, our history, it's not about surviving what's happening now, but it is really about thriving and building and creating, which we have always done as a people. And so if we can focus on that, I think that we will be doing right by our children and by the dreams that our ancestors had. Ashe.
Thank you so much for that. And it's wow, it's unbelievable that how the time has just it's a funny how time flies when you're having fun. And I just want to end on a positive note, because I remember in a discussion with Martin Luther King the third, when he said, you have to really celebrate every little step forward, right? Because the system is counting on us to give up, right? They're counting on us to get tired. And we must make a commitment not to do that. There's so many positive things. And for me, I look at just mandating Black History Month in education across Ontario, the formation of the Black Trustee Caucus. I was a co-founder of that with Patrice Barnes, who actually championed in the government, making sure that Black history was being mandated, not just a blurb or, in a comment in a history lesson. I think that's huge. I think the work and formation of many of our advocacy groups, like Parents of Black Children, right? Anchor, the amazing work they're doing, that I think is something to look forward to. That should give us hope. I think when you look at organizations like Black Esteem, ACCN, the Umoja program, the robotics, again, LBD, Leadership by Design, just great opportunities. And our kids are thriving. And it shows that when our kids are given the opportunities, that they do thrive. And I think these should give us a source of hope and encouragement. And I encourage parents to sign up, Google, go on social media, and look at all the opportunities that are there for your kids. And with that, I encourage each and every one of you to just remember that we are a people, as was mentioned, that, by all accounts, really just being here is a sign of victory and a resistance. So continue the work, continue being strong. And with that, I'd just like to say great appreciation to 100 ABC Women, the tech team, Kit Trong, Daniela Glasgow, right? Executive producer, Donna Jones Simmons, the real producer, Paige Calderia, our amazing tech support, Malcolm Edwards, And just to remind everybody that coming up on April the 19th in 2026, we're going to do to financial literacy for every life stage. And I'm telling you, it is so important. Important to me. Next to education, financial literacy, and I guess it's a type of education, is the most important thing. I think we can do as a community. So dynamic conversations on budgeting, retirement planning, investing, and wealth preservation. And everybody thinks, oh, you have nothing to invest. You don't need $1 million to invest. Start with the first dollar. Come and learn about practical insights for beginners and seasoned planners. The registration link can be found on the website of 100 ABC Women. And again, thank you to our amazing, amazing panelists. Ladies, you just warmed my heart today. And just listening to your brilliance just gives me hope. And I know that, as long as we keep on keeping on, we will achieve, and our Black children will shine. Right? And Moses didn't make the promised land, so we might not see the total elimination of anti-Black racism in education, but this is an important step in the journey. So thank you, everyone, for participating, and see you on April the 19th.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment.